Part 3, pages 36 through 50. Book. Contracts. Basics. An agent must have a working knowledge of contract law because every aspect of the business deals with the contract. A contract is an oral or written agreement to do or not to do a certain thing. Many oral, spoken, contracts are valid and enforceable. However, most contracts involving real estate must be in writing to be enforceable. The statute of frauds says that documents must be in writing to be enforceable. In most states, real estate documents such as sale contracts, deeds, and mortgages must all be in writing. Some states allow oral listings for less than 1 year, but to receive compensation, a broker needs an employment contract in writing. So it is in an agent's best interest to have a written listing agreement. Many real estate contracts contain a time for performance. For example, a listing contract has an expiration date, an offer has a time period, and a sales contract has a date by which the buyer must inspect the property, secure a mortgage commitment, and a close for the sale. If a time period is not specified, the law allows a reasonable time to complete the contract. When the phrase "time is of the essence" is written in the contract, it means that everything must be done within a specific time. If the requirements are not met, the promiser will have breached the contract and the promisee can cancel the contract. And as in clause in a contract means the buyer is buying the property as he sees it, with all existing conditions. The seller is still bound to disclose property defects, but not to make repairs. An assignment is a transfer of contract rights from one party to another. This could be the transfer of a right, title, or interest in a property. A contract is assignable unless the contract or state law forbids it. Personal service contracts are usually not assignable. The party transferring the contract is called the assigner. The party receiving the transferring contract is called the assignee. So, for example, let's say 2 years ago you entered into a 5-year lease agreement and opened your business. Today, a party wants to buy your business. If you sell your business, an assignment is permitted. You may assign your lease to the new owner. If the lease is assigned, you are the assigner, and the new owner is the assignee. The landlord would now expect the lease payment from the new owner. An assignment does not relieve the assigner from liability unless novation has been granted. Novation is the substitution of one contract for a new one, and it takes away liability. Just remember, nova is Latin for new, hence novation, a new contract, or new in Spanish. A liquidated damage clause is provision in a contract for damages if a party breaks the agreement. In a sale contract, the earnest money may be considered liquidated damages if the party agrees. That is, if the buyer breaches the agreement, the seller may keep the earnest money. Specific performance is a course of action to force a contract to be carried out. For example, if all the requirements of a contract have been met, but the seller refuses to sell the property, the buyer may sue for specific performances. Brokers do not sue for specific performance. A contract is canceled when there is an agreement between the contracting parties to waive all remaining duties and to terminate the contract. This means returning the parties to the same legal position they were in before entering into the contract. It is called rescission. Valid contract essentials. The essentials of a valid contract are capable parties, lawful object, consideration, and offer and acceptance. Capable parties. To be a capable party, the person must have legal capacity to contract. Typically, this means the person must be at least 18 years old and of sound mind. And other competent parties would include a person given authority to enter into contracts on behalf of a corporation, a person with a proper power of attorney, a fiduciary given the authority to contract, or an emancipator minor, somebody under 18 who is legally allowed to act on their own behalf because they got married, served in the military, or through court action divorced their parents. Lawful object. A contract must be entered into for a legal purpose. For example, when you see in the movies a contract to kill, that is not really a contract because it's not lawful. A contract like this with an illegal purpose is a void. A contract must also be entered into freely without duress, threat, blackmail, misinterpretation, or fraud. Consideration. Normally, when we think of consideration, we think of money, but consideration can be anything of value. It is bargained for and received. Consideration can even be love and affection. Offer and acceptance. Offer and acceptance is also called mutual consent or a meeting of the minds. An offer must contain the exact terms and conditions, and the offer must be accepted without changes. The offer must be clear in character. The property must be accurately described to identify it, and you must give an exact price. You cannot offer to buy a house for a whole lot of money. You must say $1 million or whatever the exact amount is you are offering. Don't forget OR and E rule. The offerer is the party giving the offer. The offeree is the party receiving the offer. In real estate, the offer is usually made by the buyer and received by the seller. An offer must be accepted without change by the offeree or the offeree's authorized agent. Before accepting, an offer or counteroffer can always be refused. An offer is terminated by death or insanity of the offerer or offeree. Destruction of the property or a material change can also be cause of termination. A counteroffer occurs when the seller changes any of the terms made by the offerer. This reverses the legal position of the parties, and the offerer becomes the offeree, and the offeree becomes the offerer. This means the counteroffer is a brand new contract. Valid, void, and voidable. A contract can be classified as valid, void, or voidable. Valid. A valid contract is one that meets all the basic elements of contract law. For example, you signed to buy a blue house. The house is blue, thus the contract is valid. Voidable. A voidable contract allows the option to rescind to either party. When the contract is rewritten, it is valid, but it could be voided in the future. Most sale contracts are voidable contracts because they contain contingency clauses. For example, remember that blue house you wanted to buy? Well, you signed a contract for a blue house, but now you show up to the house and it's green. This is voidable, not void. That is because the violation of the contract should not stop you from being able to buy the house. You signed for a blue house, but maybe you also like the color green. That is why you have the option to continue with the contract, making it voidable, not void. A contingency is where things depend on a specific event that must occur before a contract is binding. So, providing for a blue house when you sign for a blue house. If a contingency provision cannot be met, the contract can be legally voided, such as in the example given. Contracts that are entered into under duress, misinterpretation, or fraud are voidable. If you are put under duress, that makes the contract voidable, not void. For example, if a gun is put to your head with a person saying, "Sign the contract or else I will shoot," that is being put under duress in its most intense form. But even that does not make the contract void. It is voidable because that person pointing the gun at your head should not take away your ability to purchase the property. What if you actually like the property? Well, now you can still buy it even though you were put under duress, as the contract is voidable, not void. Void. A void contract has no legal force. It is missing an essential element. Thus, it is not a contract. A contract to kill, for example, would be void because it has an illegal purpose. You do not have the option to kill somebody. A more common example is if one of the parties involved is legally deemed mentally incompetent. If that is true, the contract is void, as it violates one of the four essential elements of a valid contract, which are mutual consent, lawful object, capable parties, and consideration. Executed and executory. An executed contract is when all parties have fulfilled their promises. For example, a sales contract is complete when the transaction closes. Do not confuse an executed contract with the act of signing a document, which is execution of the document. An executory contract is when one of both parties still have obligations yet to be performed. For example, a sales contract is executory contract until the buyer gets financing and the seller proves they have a clear and marketable title. Bilateral and unilateral. A bilateral contract is one where there is a promise for a promise. Sales contracts and listings are examples of bilateral contracts. In a listing contract, the seller promises to pay if the agent finds a buyer. A unilateral contract is one-sided agreement. That is, only one party makes a promise to do something. A lease option is a unilateral contract until the option is exercised. Another example of unilateral contract is a lost dog sign. You find the dog, you get paid, but you are not promising to go and look for the dog. Types of contracts. Land contract. A land contract is a financial agreement between a vendor and a vendee. Generally, title is held by the seller until final payment is made. The land acts as a security device. Usually, the seller is responsible for paying taxes and insurance because the seller holds legal title to the property. A land contract is also known as a contract for deed, an agreement to purchase and sell, or land installment contract. In a land contract, the seller is the vendor and the buyer is the vendee. The buyer has an equitable interest, which means a beneficial interest in the property and gives the holder the right to acquire legal title in the future. Option contract. In an option contract, the seller is the optioner and the buyer is the optionee. It is a unilateral contract because the seller must sell, but the buyer has the option to buy. When created, an option contract is a unilateral contract, but when the buyer uses the option, it becomes a bilateral contract. The option is assignable to another party unless the contract forbids it. In a lease option, the lessee agrees to lease the property with an option to buy the property. The option is usually given in exchange for consideration. This could be money up front or added to the rent. The lessee would be the optionee and the lessor would be the optioner, as they are giving the option to purchase at a designated time. Implied contract. An implied contract is a contract that is not in writing and is lawful because the actions of the parties and the circumstances they are in. How does that happen? An old saying comes to mind: if it walks like a duck, smells like a duck, and sounds like a duck, then it must be a duck. If it looks like a contract, then it probably is. Listings. A listing is an employment contract between principal and broker where the broker is being employed to find a buyer and accept a deposit. It is the most essential element of a broker-principal relationship. A listing hires a broker to find a buyer, not to sell a house. This is an important distinction. Another important distinction. Remember, the seller hires the broker to find the buyer, not the agent. People think they are hiring the agent because for all the practical purposes, they are, as that is who solicited the business and will be conducting the transaction. But in actuality, the agent is working on behalf of the broker. Therefore, when the house sells and the seller pays a commission, that commission is going to the broker, not the agent. The broker will then share the commission with the agent as per their agreement. The next big question people have is, if you are telling me that the broker is hired to find the buyer, then what does the agent of the buyer do? Think of it like this. The broker of the seller says to all other brokers and their agents, I've been hired to find a buyer for Mr. Smith's property on Oak Tree Lane. If you have a buyer and they buy this property, I will share my commission with you for helping fulfill my contract with Mr. Smith. The amount that is going to be shared must be disclosed to the seller. Now, in real life, they do not stand on a house and use a megaphone, but that is the gist of how it works. The more commonly accepted way is to put the property on the MLS. MLS stands for Multiple Listing Service. The MLS is a database of available properties listed by real estate agents. A listing agreement is a personal service contract. That means that if the principal or the seller die, or either party became incapacitated, or the property was physically destroyed, such as by a fire or natural disaster, the listing agreement would be terminated. In short, remember that a personal service contract needs a person to be there. Therefore, you cannot assign this contract to another person. The broker and seller may mutually agree to end the listing agreement. Both the broker and the seller have mutual responsibilities. If a party breaches their duty, the other party can terminate the listing. For example, the broker is usually responsible for advertising a property. If the broker fails to advertise the property, the seller could terminate the listing. A material change can also lead to the listing being terminated. A material change is something that would affect the value of the listed property. For example, when a property was listed, it was zoned residential. The property was changed to a commercial zone after the contract was signed. This material change would terminate the listing agreement. Most listing contracts have a specific ending date. It can be as simple as this contract will begin at 1 p.m. on January 1st, 2010, and it will end at midnight on August 8, 2010. Look at our listing sections to see which ones need an end date. A listing contract contains many elements. You would want your listing to contain the following: names of the parties to the contract, the type of agency created, the broker's authority and responsibilities, the location of the property, which may be a street address, legal description or tax parcel numbers, the listing price, beginning and ending dates, real and personal property included, the commission to be paid, authorization to advertise including the placement of a for sale sign on the property, type of deed used for conveyance, the terms for termination of the contract, and the indemnification clause, fair housing and antitrust information, the signatures of parties authorized to perform, and the protection period clause. The protection period clause is also known as a safety clause, extender, or carryover clause. The purpose of this clause is to allow the agent to close deals with buyers found during the term of the listing. For example, let's say that last week you showed a property to a buyer on Thursday. The listing expired on Friday. Then they come back and make you an offer on Saturday. You would still get paid because you were able to close the deal with the buyer you found during the term of the listing. This only covers the amount of time agreed upon in the protection period clause. If a broker is interested in buying property that she or he has listed, this provision needs to be included in the listing agreement. It is legal for an agent or broker to buy listed property. Most states require licenses to disclose that they have a license before an offer is made on any property that they are interested in purchasing. Many states require this disclosure to be in writing, as they may also require the disclosure of the broker's profit in the transaction. This is called listing with an option. Types of listings. Exclusive listing. In an exclusive listing, only one broker can be hired. The listing belongs to that broker exclusively. Because only one broker can be hired, there must be a specific termination date. If two exclusive listings are signed, the seller could be liable for 2 commissions. This is stated on the contract. Remember, in a listing there should only be 1 commission. The seller hires that broker to find the buyer. People think there are 2 commissions, one to the broker of the seller and one to the broker of the buyer. Some people think there are 4 once you include the buyer's agent, but in actuality there is only 1. The broker of the seller gets the commission and then shares that 1 commission with the broker of the buyer for helping him/her find a buyer. The way that commission is divided must be disclosed to the seller. The brokers will then share that commission with the agent who facilitated the transaction on their behalf. Exclusive authorization and right to sell listing. An exclusive authorization and right to sell listing is most commonly referred to as listing. When you see a for sale sign in front of the house with the broker's name on it on a typical Sunday afternoon, it is more than likely just that, an exclusive authorization and right to sell listing. The key element here is that regardless of how a buyer wants to buy the house, the broker is getting paid a commission. This helps avoid any potential conflict between the broker, who is trying to solicit a buyer, and the seller who hired them to list the property. The owner agrees to sell the property through the listing broker. To put it in more technical terms, the listing broker does not need to show that he or she is the procuring cause of the buyer. Exclusive agency listing. Exclusive agency listing is much like the exclusive right to sell listing. The seller only works with one broker. However, there is one huge difference. In an exclusive agency listing, if the owner sells the house themselves, the agent gets no commission, which means that the agent has to prove they were the reason the buyer came to buy the house. To use the terms of the real estate exam, the agent would have to prove they were the procuring cause of the buyer. Imagine there was a broker's for sale sign in the front yard of the house, and right next to it there was a for sale by the owner's sign. Thinking about that image makes you realize why agents do not like to use exclusive agency listings. If somebody is buying the house, the last thing you want to do is fight with the seller about who found the buyer. Remember, under an exclusive agency listing, if the seller can prove the owner brought them there, they will pay you nothing. Open listing. Imagine if a seller wanted to sell a house and the broker came up to him and said, "If I bring a buyer, you will pay me a commission?" The seller says, "Yes, of course." Then 10 minutes later, another broker comes up to him and says, "If I bring a buyer, will you pay me a commission?" The seller says, "Yes, of course." This keeps happening over and over again, and the seller has agreed to the same deal with all those brokers. This would most probably be an open listing. It doesn't sound like a bad thing, right? Whoever brings the buyer gets paid for it, as long as they are the principal in the transaction or have an active real estate license. The problem with this is, why would you spend time and money advertising somebody's house if there's a good chance somebody else will get paid and you will get nothing? As the broker, you would have to prove that you were the one who brought the buyer. This can be very tricky to do. Imagine if every broker sign was in the front yard. How would you prove which broker sign drew that buyer in? This is just one of many complications with this type of listing. That is why you do not see in a standard residential sale. However, there are situations where this type of listing works. For example, a developer would enter into open listings with local brokers. The brokers bring the buyers to the subdivision, and if the buyer buys, then they get paid. That makes this a non-exclusive listing, as it is not exclusive to just one broker. Net listing. A net listing is when an agent agrees to sell a property for a minimum price. Anything over the minimum price belongs to the agent as commission. So in a net listing, there is no agreed selling price and no agreed commission. For example, a homeowner wants $500,000 for their house. If the agent sells it for $550,000, they made $50,000. Sounds great, right? The problem is that if the agent sells it for $500,000, the agent makes nothing. So in this case, the agent would have to manipulate the list price in order to earn a commission, which would be illegal in most states. An agent must account for all money and property that comes into his or her possession. Normally, this just means that the earnest money deposits. State laws regulate when the broker must put the earnest money into an escrow or trust account. Earnest money deposit. The earnest money deposit is to show you are serious about buying a house. And the proposal? What comes to mind when you think of proposals? That's right, marriage. When a man proposes to the love of his life, nobody would take him seriously without that one special item, a ring. Can you imagine what a proposal would be like without a ring? There will only be one response if he forgets the ring. What a loser. Nobody would take that offer seriously. The point is that an earnest money deposit works in just the same way as an engagement ring. It is there to show that you are serious about your offer, and if something falls through during the process, you might lose that deposit. It's only once the bride and groom say, "I do," that escrow is closed. Valuation and market analysis. Depreciation. Depreciation is any loss in value of a property over time. Tax laws allow investors to depreciate the value of improvements they make to a house. The term depreciation is often used for income taxes. This type of depreciation reduces taxable income and is usually calculated using the straight line method. This method assumes depreciation occurs at the same rate over the structure's economic lifetime or the time period that improvement can be used. The cost of replacement of the improvement can be added to this initial cost, and this sum total is the depreciation which the property has suffered. Depreciation can either be incurable or curable. What does that mean? If the value of the property increases by the same amount of money as the cost of the improvement or more, then this is curable. The appraiser cares about whether a problem can be repaired, but also if the repair makes financial sense. For example, if spending $5,000 to repair a roof would add $5,000 or more to the value of the house, then the deterioration of the roofs is said to be curable. If fixing the roof would just increase the value by $650, then the condition of the roof would be considered incurable. Types of depreciation. Economic obsolescence. Economic obsolescence is a form of depreciation. It is caused by factors that are not on the property, in the property, or even within the property lines. It might be caused by something like the neighborhood experiencing a rise in crime. It can also be caused by economic factors such as changes in the job market, recession, or national economic depression that reduces the property value can also be economic obsolescence. Examples of causes can include flight patterns be changed to go over your house and a highway being constructed nearby. Functional obsolescence and economic obsolescence can be difficult to differentiate at times. For example, when consumer taste change, older properties can lose some of their desirability. This happened when the builders started putting master bedrooms in homes. The older homes with no master bedrooms lost some of their appeal. Lack of a master bedroom was earlier cited as an example of functioning obsolescence. It could perhaps be argued that actually it was the other, more desirable properties that caused the loss in value, and this was outside of the property lines of the property in question, so that this should be considered economic obsolescence. In the end, it probably makes no real difference whether a specific factor is considered functional or economic, as long as it is considered, and deductions made twice. Economic obsolescence is almost never curable. For example, if there is a sudden spike in crime rates in the neighborhood, there is no one the homeowner can pay to fix the neighborhood. Even if an owner had that kind of money, it would never add enough value to that owner's property. Obsolescence is a form of depreciation which occurs when a property is no longer wanted even though it is still in good condition. Functioning obsolescence. Functional obsolescence is defined as a form of depreciation resulting in a loss in value due to conditions within the property. Some examples are poor design, too many or too few materials, excess construction, lack of utility. In other words, there are features that are not practical or desirable, or overly costly operating expenses. Think about if you have 2 cars and the house only had 1 car garage. Functionally obsolete. Functionally obsolescence is a form of depreciation due to the lack of care for the improvements. It can be caused by many factors, including changing consumer demands, buildings which no longer suit the need for this particular neighborhood, or improvements in design or construction techniques. For example, most of the tract homes built 70 years ago were planned so that all the bedrooms were the same size. That was considered fantastic back then. However, that will not go down so well these days, as newer houses are expected to have 1 master bedroom, if not more. A master bedroom needs to be bigger than the others and have its own bathroom facilities. The houses constructed back then are now considered functionally obsolete because there is no master bedroom. A garage with space for only 1 car is another example of functional obsolescence. Physical deterioration. Physical deterioration is the most obvious form of depreciation because you can see it. It is a loss in value due to age or the elements. Mother Nature will eventually take her course on buildings and homes and will eventually wear them out. When your maintenance does not keep up with the natural wear and tear, you will have physical deterioration. Physical deterioration is not a form of obsolescence. This would hurt the property's effective age. Your house is simply falling apart. Most forms of physical deterioration are curable. For example, suppose your house needs a paint new paint costing about $6,500. There is a chance a prospective buyer would pay an extra $6,500 for the house once painted, which would cover the painting expenditures. This would be an example of curable physical deterioration. Curable physical deterioration examples include paint jobs, roof repairs, deferred maintenances, repairs to the heating or cooling system, repairs to faulty wiring, replacing loose tiles, repairing a breakage, replacing dated constructional material, and repairing normal wear and tear.